It is 9 o'clock. It is the 11th day of October 2021. I am your number one guide to all tabletop role playing game news, weather, and sports. The OGGM content warning, trigger warning. This video is a video response to a very upsetting video I just watched, which is sort of becoming a personal crusade of mine, which means that I'm going to be saying some things that people do not like to hear. But I'm responding to a video. Actually, I'm not responding to the entire video. I'm responding to certain statements that were made in the video. And I know by saying this video and making this video, I am giving the individual in question exactly what they want because I'm drawing attention to them. So it's a very slippery slope because if I don't respond, I am giving him power by saying he's right because I'm not responding. But if I do respond, I'm giving him attention, which is what he wants. So either way, I am adding fire to something I don't want to add fire to. But I believe my personal values and my love of the tabletop role-playing game hobby tells me I should respond. So it's very confusing, and it's very frightening, and it's very scary, and it's just yet another chapter in the continued toxicity that is brewing in our society of tabletop role-playing game. And rather than helping to bridge the gap, this individual continues to make the gap wider and say things that are not only 100% incorrect, but are extremely hurtful and harmful. And I shouldn't respond, but this individual has a very large following on YouTube and appears in a lot of other role-playing game, tabletop role-playing industry vlogs. And why I may never have as many followers as this individual does, in fact, I probably won't, I know I do have a voice, and I have a responsibility to the tabletop role-playing game community. And I have a responsibility to YouTubers, and I have a responsibility to people in general to at least step up and say, I want to be counted. At the end, if you don't say something, you're culpable to the damage individuals like this are causing. And even though it's only about the hobby, he has made some statements that now progress him past simply the my game is better than your game aspect. And, tabletop role-playing game has become incredibly toxic, and I have been trying to fight that toxicity for a long time now, and I feel like I'm not making any headway. I don't know if I'm making it worse. So recently, this individual, and although I won't mention his name, I think we all know who I'm talking about, made a video, and I'm assuming this video is in response to some things that have been said about his previous video. So this is a video that he probably made out of anger. And when addressing this individual and the things that come out of his mouth, I am of two schools of thought. Either he 100% believes the things that come out of his mouth, which are extremely frightening, or he is just an amazing troll and has just got everybody dancing to his program, which is getting him what he wants, which is also frightening because he does incite a very passionate response from individuals like myself. DM Bloodworth over at Unscripted Unchained has already responded. I'm sure Grim Jim and some others are going to respond. And again, people are telling me just ignore him, but I can't. And of all the statements that he made, the one that is most upsetting is that he claims that if you play OSR, if you play any role-playing game that is not Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, you are actively harming society. How about no? He also made a statement that that people who are not playing D&D, OSR players, and the 64% of the world that is not playing D&D, that is playing other tabletop role-playing games besides D&D, and that's not just Harpooperly or made up numbers. Those are actual numbers, okay? The percentages were cut up by people who, are not associated with tabletop role-playing game. They looked at the numbers of D&D Beyond. They looked at the numbers of Drive-Thru. They looked at the numbers of Roll20. They looked at sales all across the world, and we know that 54 to 60% of the games sold are D&D, but of the games being played, of the games being sold worldwide, 64% is other games, not D&D. In fact, what's the number one tabletop role-playing game in Asia? Which, is the largest commodity market in the world? Call of Cthulhu, not D&D. So if you do not play 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, if you do not watch Critical Role, if you do not follow the beliefs of this individual, if you do not play 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, you are actively harming society. So if you play Call of Cthulhu, if you play Alice is Missing, if you play Vampire the Masquerade, if you play Blue Planet, if you play Tales from the Loop, if you play Star Trek, Star Wars, Star Frontiers, if you play Pathfinder, if you play Lady Blackbird, if you play Ravenscar, if you play Delta Green, if you play Dungeon Crawl Classic, if you play Heroes Unlimited, if you play Marvel Superheroes, if you're a kid playing No Thank You Evil, if you are a child playing No Thank You Evil or Hero Kids or Mouse Quest, you are actively harming society. If you do not play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition the way it is now, the way it is portrayed on Critical Role, you are actively harming society. He also went on to say that Dungeons & Dragons is such an important cultural icon across the world that if you do not play it, it's only charismatic, accomplished people who play it. And if you want to be charismatic and accomplished and famous and rich like Critical Role, you need to play 5e. And there's no place in America you can go. There's no place in the world you can go where Dungeons & Dragons hasn't had a cultural impact. Dungeons & Dragons, in his mind, is more important than baseball, which is thus why I have this picture here. 100% of America knows what D&D is, and you cannot go anywhere in the U.S. without encountering the cultural influence of Dungeons & Dragons. That is completely 100% not true. 100% of the world knows what D&D is, and there's no place in the world you can go where you cannot interact with the cultural impact that is Dungeons & Dragons. Again, completely 100% accurate. There are plenty of places in the United States. There's plenty of places here in California where people don't play D&D, don't know what D&D is. On an average day, I probably encounter 5 people who have never played D&D and don't know what D&D is. There are plenty of places in the United States of America where people don't know what D&D is and don't play D&D. I have traveled, well, not all of the country, but at least all of California. I've been in Portland, I've been in Washington, I've been in Utah, I have been in Colorado, I have been in Arizona, I have been in New Mexico, I have been in Oklahoma, I've been to New York, I've been to Texas. I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, I have met hundreds of people who do not know what D&D is. In fact, I can say that most of my coworkers don't know what D&D is and don't play it. I've been all across the world. And I can say without a shadow of doubt, I have been to at least 4 places where people never heard of D&D, never played D&D. And I know for a fact that the number 2 role-playing game in the world is Call of Cthulhu, and the number 1 role-playing game in Asia is Call of Cthulhu. They don't play D&D there. If you play the OSR, if you play any role-playing game that isn't Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the way it's played by Critical Role, the way it's played now, you are actively harming society. I want you to think about those words that came out of this individual mouse. Telling people that they have to bend a knee and accept 5th edition D&D as the only way to play the game. Where have we heard these words before, ladies and gentlemen? Where have we heard somebody telling us we have to bend a knee? Throughout all history, in all times, in all places, there has always been someone telling us, especially as a Jew, we have to bend a knee to their beliefs. When was the last time we heard this? Well, we hear it all the time. We hear it in countries like Afghanistan, where the Taliban is telling people they have to bend a knee. We hear it from right-wing neo-Nazis and from the Nazi movement in general and fascists throughout history who's telling us we have to bend a knee. And now this individual is telling me that if I don't play 5th edition the way Critical Role plays it, I am actively harming society, and I need to bend my knee to his beliefs. Bend my knee to 5th edition. Accept 5th edition as my Lord and Savior, and follow the beliefs without question of 5th edition. Well, first off, 5th edition isn't a religion. It's a game. It's not even a political movement. It's a game. And you know who tells people to bend a knee? Tyrants. Now, in regards to how Critical Role is the future of Dungeons & Dragons, when was the last time you watched Critical Role? Critical Role isn't playing D&D. They are playing D20 Fantasy as created by Matt Mercer. The game they're playing is definitely not D&D. In fact, Critical Role has not been at any Wizards of the Coast D&D official events in any way, shape, or form in over a year. They weren't at the Strixhaven Witchlight thing. They weren't at the one before that. They weren't at the one before that. They had in 2021. They have not been at any of the Wizards of the Coast official sponsored content. Plus, Critical Role is a bunch of paid actors performing a scripted performance, much the same way the WWE is scripted. It's not to say it's not real. It's not to say that mistakes happen. It's not to say there are not consequences for their actions, but it is scripted. And I know there's lots of people who will say, no, it's not. But yeah, it is. They have even admitted it. Maybe not directly, but indirectly. So yeah. And sure, you can choose not to believe that, and that's perfectly fine. I don't care that Critical Role made $9 million. I care that money could have gone elsewhere, and I care about what they're going to do with that $9 million. If they reinvest that $9 million in charity, I have no problem. If they reinvest that $9 million in their production company and make their Critical Role role-playing game and take all the people like you out of the hobby, I'm perfectly fine with that. If they help the individuals that follow their show get the help that they need and admit that their show is not therapy, it could be therapeutic, but it's not therapy, I have no trouble with that. I have no trouble with Critical Role making money. I've never had any problem with Critical Role except for the fact they don't admit they're scripted, except, of course, now they sort of have. I have a problem with individuals who use Critical Role as a way to attack other people and who claim that Critical Role is the only way to play D&D. And to say things like, well, Critical Role are charismatic, young, influential individuals, and if you want to be successful in D&D, you have to be like them and you have to play like them, and only people who are charismatic and successful play D&D. And I could just go on and on about the non-stop nonsense that comes out of this individual's mouth. And it comes back to the original start of my production here. If I say these things, am I giving him what he wants? But if I don't say these things, am I culpable to the damage he is causing? And I don't want to say these things, except this individual has over 1,000 followers, almost several thousand followers from what I can guess. He is seen on multiple productions. Apparently, he is somebody who is considered a voice and is considered worth following. And that's fine. You don't have to agree with the things I say. If you agree with the way his passionate love for D&D 5e, that's fine. I totally support you passionately loving 5e. I don't hate 5e. I like it. I think it's a fun game to play. I like a lot of the ideas. I have enjoyed playing it. I've enjoyed running it. I don't like the toxic trash fire that has become associated with 5e. I like the OSR. I play the OSR. I run the OSR. I enjoy it. I don't appreciate the toxic trash fire that is in some aspects of the OSR. In defense of the OSR, all I can say is, and it sounds like a 2-year-old, well, you started it. And that is true. The racism and all the things the other people have said about players like myself and the OSR, that came from them. We never said anything bad about 5e. 5e players attacked us. If you play the OSR, if you play any game that isn't Dungeons and Dragons, you are actively harming society. You are not a charismatic, accomplished person if you don't play 5e. How about no? Tabletop role-playing game of the year, Alice is Missing, is not a D&D game. In fact, it's not even really a role-playing game. And yet, the governing board of gaming, the people who decide what is the game of the year, decided that Alice is Missing is the tabletop role-playing game of the year, is the most important role-playing game in the United States. You know how many nominations Dungeons and Dragons got this year at Gamma, at Origins, at the Ennies? None. Why? Because the industry doesn't feel that Dungeons and Dragons is relevant to the future of the industry. Alice is Missing is more important than D&D. You know what last year's number one role-playing game was? Tabletop role-playing game of the year? Mork, Borg, and Aliens. D&D didn't receive a single nomination in any category. The year before that, Zweinhinder. The year before that, Tales from the Loop. In the past 10 years, do you know how many times Wizards of the Coast D&D has been nominated for Game of the Year? None. And yet, if I don't play D&D, I'm actively harming society. How? How am I actively harming society if I don't play 5th edition D&D? If I don't bend a knee to you, if I don't bend a knee to Critical Role, if I don't bend a knee to 5th edition, if I don't love the game the way you love it, how? And if you can prove to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that I am actively harming society, that I'm actively harming the children I work with on a daily basis, that I'm actively harming my friends and family, that I'm actively harming people in another state, in another country, by not playing 5th edition. If you can prove to me beyond a shadow of a doubt, I will stop playing role-playing game altogether. I will quit. I will bring down my vlog. If you can prove to me, not just with opinions, but with actual facts, that I, the OGGM, Michael Strauss, am actively harming society by not playing 5th edition. And remember, I work with kids. I will stop playing because I don't believe that I am actively harming society. If anything, I believe I'm helping society. If anything, I believe that my 40 some odd years in the hobby have in some way, shape, or form helped the hobby, been important. I've won awards. I've been, I've play tested, I've run, I've written, I've published. I don't know how many you have, sir, but I know I have. I don't believe I've ever actively harmed society because I chose one day not to play D&D 5th edition, not to run 5th edition, not to actively support 5th edition. And again, I play 5th edition all the time. I've run it. I'll run it again. I just don't want to deal with all the weirdness, but that's a separate topic for a separate vlog. But yeah, I don't have any issues with 5th edition. I have issues with individuals like you. You claim you love the game, but I think you're afraid. I think you're afraid because you see that Critical Role is going to abandon Dungeons and Dragons. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. The writing's on the wall. They've already begun the steps. It is inevitable from a purely financial point of view that they need to cut the umbilical cord and become their own thing. And all the Critical Role fans will follow them, which will leave Wizards of the Coast in 5th edition floundering, wondering what to do next. But that's happened to them before, and they've managed to come out on top. So I think you are afraid. I think you know you've been called out, and I think this is your response. And a response would have been fine. You could even have directed the response at me, and I would have probably not have said anything. Except, of course, you said, if I do not play 5th edition, if people are not playing 5th edition, they are actively harming society in the same way a terrorist group is harming society, in the same way racism and sexism and homophobia and ageism and disabilityism are harming society. I have to bend a knee and accept 5e. Words like that make it so I will never accept 5e. I am not going to bend a knee. I am going to stand against people like you saying these things. And whether the things that come out of your mouth are 100% truth, satire, or you're just an amazing troll and you know you're going to get responses like this, I really don't care anymore. If I'm giving you what you want, great. I could have ignored everything else, but telling me I am actively harming society and I need to bend a knee as a human being, as a disabled human being, as a Jewish human being, as an LGBTQTA human being, as an individual who works in childcare and education and has for 20 years, as somebody who has been part of the hobby for 40 years, as somebody who has seen terrorism and bullying firsthand. No, I will not bend a knee. And no, I do not believe I am actively harming society. And if you love any role-playing game that isn't 5e, more power to you. And if you love 5e, great, as long as you do not use it as a way to hurt others. If you play OSR, if you play any role-playing game, if you agree that Alice is Missing is the tabletop role-playing game of the year, you are actively harming society. I want you to think about that for the love of the game.